GM, good morning. Welcome to the Milk Road Show, the daily crypto show where we break down crypto news faster than politicians break trade agreements. I'm your host, Jay Hamilton, and there's two major things happening in the markets right now on this Monday morning and over the past few weeks. First, we got tariffs causing massive uncertainty. Markets are dipping. What happens next? What does this all mean? And then second, we have AI. DeepSeek shocked the world just only a week ago. So recent. And people are starting to think, are tech stocks overpriced? Is Bitcoin overpriced as a result of that? That is also causing markets to push down. So we had to bring on an expert who could break this all down for us and help us wrap our head around that. So we got Matt Cole, CEO of Strive, a leading asset and wealth management company. We're going to talk with Matt about why he has so much conviction in Bitcoin in the face of AI innovation and the impact that AI innovation will have on markets and then therefore Bitcoin. We're also going to talk about why Matt believes that you should really use Bitcoin as the hurdle rate or the benchmark for all your investments and what that means when the rest of the world catches up to that thesis. Before we jump in, guys, please do me a favor, subscribe, like, make a comment on the show wherever you're listening. It helps us so much and it helps us get bigger and better guests on the show, which helps you better with your investments. Now let's jump in and hear from Matt. Matt, welcome to the Milk Road Show.
GM, how you doing?
Good, man. I love somebody who throws out a GM. You don't hear GMs very much in the space anymore.
They don't work at all.
I'm doing great. Let's start, Matt, with you put out a tweet. Actually, you know what? Let's start with tariffs. I got to start there because that's sort of the big news right now. For everybody who is maybe on the sidelines, not fully understanding what is going on with tariffs. I think there's this confusion of like, are tariffs happening or are they not happening, right? There's a lot of cross trade war sort of comments coming out of all different politicians on all sides right now. So just give us your view on tariffs currently.
So I think everyone freaked out over the weekend and said, oh, tariffs are coming right now. And what they forgot is Trump's negotiating style. And so my belief is that Trump believes, and I actually believe this too, that for the last several decades, as we've moved towards globalization, that a lot of trade agreements that have been done with various countries have not been fully in America's interest. They've been in the interest of the world, but not in the interest necessarily as America. And so I think Trump's view is that tariffs would be better than keeping things in their current status quo, but actually reaching a new agreement that's more favorable to America would be the most desirable outcome. And so that's clearly the outcome that he wants. I don't think he wants massive tariffs, maybe some small amount of tariffs. So I think that's the driving force. And my belief is he's ultimately going to get a lot of the way in that direction. And so you look at even over just the last weekend where 25% tariffs on Canada, on Mexico. And then as we're recording this, and it's midday, so who knows what it'll be like when this podcast drops. The world could change, right? But midday, Mexico's already announced that they're going to delay tariffs for 30 days. Mexico and America, so kind of a little bit of a truce there. They've also announced major changes, putting a bunch of their security border guards around Mexico to try to stop the increase of fentanyl into the United States. So you can clearly see that these tariffs are changing the dynamics, that America is getting something more favorable out of this. I think it'll likely happen in a similar manner with Canada and other nations as well. So my base case is that tariffs might happen for a short period of time, but that the globe does not go out into some trade war. That's my base case. Now, I think that there obviously is a chance that things get worse with regards to a trade war. We have to be prepared for that. But as we kind of go on in this podcast and talk about AI, I think ultimately what you'll see is that AI is a much bigger story than the tariffs. But let's just say that they do happen for a second. If tariffs were to happen, it's clearly going to be a negative for the economy. But and this is a big but, because this is a crypto show. It is a huge tailwind for Bitcoin over the medium and the long run. Because if you think about the dollar as the reserve asset for the world, if you have a massive trade war and your nations around the globe, do you think that they're going to want to hold dollars as their reserve asset? No, right? And so this is something that a lot of people in the crypto industry, myself as well, has had conviction that the dollar's days as the reserve currency are not going to be infinite. It's more of a matter of when and to what degree the dollar loses reserve currency status than if it happens. And so there's versions that the dollar can extend its status as the reserve currency for years or decades, but that's the direction that this is going. And crypto is likely going to be the answer for many nation states. But a global trade war would make that happen on a much more expedited basis. And so even if the trade war breaks out and there's a short-term down correction, I think it's going to be one to buy for crypto markets and Bitcoin specifically.
Mhm. And you also said recently that you felt that there could be an unwind of Bitcoin back to sort of pre-election prices. Just talk us through that scenario and the likelihood of that happening in your mind.
Yeah, so I like to think about the world in probabilities. So you'll rarely see me on Twitter say, I think that Bitcoin's going to be 150, 200K, 500K, whatever at the end of the year. That's just not the way my mind works. I think about all sorts of scenarios and I try to place a probability on various scenarios. And obviously, just think about the last 24 hours, how much information's changed. Those scenarios change in real time. But if you were to say right now, what do I think the probability is of a correction and unwind of Bitcoin back to pre-election levels, which is around 65, 70K, I would put it around 20, 25%. And I think that's a high enough probability that you have to be prepared for it, but it's also not a base case prediction. Right now, my base case prediction is that the chop that we're seeing right now goes on for the next few months, and ultimately we end the year at much higher prices. That's kind of my base case, and I think that there's scenarios where break out sooner. I probably also couch that at around 25%, but base case kind of some of this chop continuing for the next month is kind of my base case. But I think when you think about a correction, if that were to happen, I think if you can handle the volatility of crypto, that's a huge blessing, and one that if you're not already fully deployed, you deploy or you go out the risk spectrum and look to take advantage of.
Okay, let's talk about AI. So, what was your reaction? What was your thought when you saw DeepSeek news that they had created this AI for $5 million in a way shorter time period, basically proving that hey, AI innovation is going to happen faster at a cheaper price than any of us thought. How did you respond to that, and what is that sort of? Let's dive into how that helps you think about the this year, and probably the biggest factor of this year will be AI innovation.
Yeah, well, since then there's been a lot of reports that I think are pretty credible that they probably didn't do this for $5 million. But I actually don't think that matters. 5 million, $1 billion, whatever. The fact of the matter is that they created a major innovation in AI that was not planned, right? And that doesn't need as much compute, doesn't need as many powerful chips or as many powerful data centers to produce a very similar quality of data as what many of the American companies. That's an innovation. It doesn't matter if it costs $1 trillion or $5 million, right? And they open sourced it. And so that means that all these American models are already implementing that into their own models. I think Perplexity already has already done this. Maybe there's more, but what this shows is AI is going to happen faster and it's going to happen cheaper than people were predicting. And so markets are not prepared for that. And I think that's something that's really hard. Exponential innovation is really hard to get your mind around it because it's very hard to think in an exponential manner. So I think you have to just simplify it. And the simplifying factor is that AI is going to be really good, really fast, and really cheap. And I think that ultimately with AI, it's kind of hard to invest in it because you think about, okay, what do I invest in? Do I buy? Let's say you even can buy. Do you buy and put an investment in OpenAI as an example, or do you buy Nvidia, or do you buy what do you buy? I don't think it's clear who the winners are going to be and who the losers are going to be in this. I think there's an argument to be made that almost every company in America is a loser actually in AI because AI actually gives power back to the individual. That if these AI agents are so good and so cheap and they're in the power of every single one of our hands, there's probably a lot of businesses that we don't need anymore. And so I think there's potential for pretty large scale disruptions in companies. I like the idea of billion-dollar plus companies being created by like a single individual or a group of three people. I think that's going to be a trend that we're going to see. So I think individuals should be spending a lot of their time in AI, but investing in Bitcoin, saving in Bitcoin. I think Bitcoin is the only obvious answer in AI as what to invest in that I think has just so many tailwinds behind it. But as far as individual, spend your time in AI, invest in Bitcoin, and obviously for I know your audience is go out the risk spectrum in crypto, right? But as far as like a long-term, multi-decade investment, I think saving in Bitcoin makes so much sense.
I want to dive a little bit deeper into how you see AI innovation and playing out over the next. I don't know what time period you think about it in, but I tend to think about it as, I don't know, 5 years keeps on. I think a lot of people are saying 5 years is a that the world will be different 5 years from now than it is today, like substantially different in a way that we've really never seen probably in our lifetimes, right? Maybe if you're a gray hair and you're around for the wars, maybe you've seen some type of this type of transformation, but even then, possibly not, right? I think AI is humanity's greatest innovation, is truly absolutely insane. We have created artificial intelligence that is basically smarter than most humans, or on the way of getting there. What is the disruption? Like, play us out. How do you see this? What is going to happen in the next 5 years? Because I think we need to understand this better, of how it impacts both humans, but more so how it impacts like companies and markets, in order to understand why it's so important, to why Bitcoin is really becoming this incredible investment tool.
Yeah, if you were to rewind 2 years ago and you said AI is happening, what's going to get displaced? Most people would have probably said blue collar jobs. The truck driver is going to get displaced, the plumber is going to get displaced, but white collar jobs are safe. And the more AI innovations happen, it's seemingly more likely that it's the opposite, right? And it's the white collar jobs that are going to get displaced. And I've been using AI since it came out, and I would say even 3, 4 months ago when I used it, I was like, like it's okay, I can do a few tasks. And over the last couple months, the scale of improvement in these models have been so substantial that my base case is in 5 years that AI is better than almost every single white collar worker out there. And so if that's your base case, then yes, it's going to take time for disruption to fully take place, for AI to actually be implemented and replace people. Like different companies are going to be at different levels of implementing a technological advancement, but the technology and the power of it itself will be there. And so that's what we have to prepare for, is that once that's happened, I don't think there's going to be a need for very many white collar jobs. And I don't think that means something that we have to be overly scared about. I think there's a lot of productive ways that we could think about putting people to work in society that I think would take a long time for AI to actually replicate. And I've spent a good amount of time thinking about this, and I'll just give you a couple examples of not necessarily predictions, but just interesting things that could happen in a society where we don't need to spend our days hovering over a computer. One could be that the idea of a single person working and supporting the family could come back, actually. That we've moved in society to needing two-parent households to both work to afford living. Maybe that's no longer the case. That would be a huge improvement. It would be a massive decrease in the amount of workers out there. But if a parent, whether it's man or woman, stays behind and is able to raise a kid, that there's more kids. And you remember Elon talks about this a lot, that we actually have a fertility crisis in this globe where fertility rates are plummeting, that actually represent an existential risk to humanity if people stop having babies, right? And so the ability for someone to stay behind and raise a family would be massive. So that would be a huge positive for the globe. Secondarily, if you think about how the globe has changed, I like looking at some of the architecture in Europe from like the 1400s, the Renaissance era. You go to Italy and you just see these beautiful buildings, and then you see modern buildings in America that are just basically made as cheap as you possibly can. Well, maybe we go back to an era where we actually have time to make beautiful buildings, beautiful projects again. That could actually be a golden era for humanity. Beautiful buildings, people staying home, raising families. There's a maybe more emphasis on local farming, right? Healthy farming, organic farming, better food supply. That would be a world that I'd love to live in, and it would have almost a complete collapse of white collar jobs, but a much better society. And so I think about this from a pretty optimistic point of view, and I'm pretty optimistic on what this could be. I'm sure that's not fully what happens, but moving in that direction, I think would be something that we should be very excited about. But the disruption that as it happens will be, I'm sure, pretty messy and scary for many.
And it's only natural that um, our reptilian brain brings out the fear and the fight or flight as soon as you hear that, hey, every white collar job might be gone and because of AI. Like obviously that's going to be a natural response. But let's just put that aside for a second. I think regardless of how the scenarios play out, and I love your optimism, I'm fully with you on that. I'd rather be an optimist and be wrong than be a pessimist and be right. If we all agree AI innovation is going to cause change regardless of the outcome, let's talk about, okay, that's going to disrupt everything. It's not only going to disrupt us as individuals, it's going to disrupt businesses and it's going to disrupt markets. And why does that place Bitcoin in your view as really the best trade of, I'm putting words in your mouth, but I'm assuming the best trade of 2025, the best trade right now?
Yeah, so if you think about a standard portfolio that doesn't own Bitcoin or crypto, you might think about a 60-40 portfolio, 60% index stocks, 40% bonds. And so 40% of your portfolio is lending money in the middle of a global fiat debt crisis. That to me makes no sense. And it hasn't made sense before AI innovation. And this kind of gets back to my background's actually fixed income. I used to manage about $70 billion at CalPERS, which is the largest public pension in America. And I started my career literally right after the great financial crisis, right when Bitcoin started, and the pension funded rates across America plummeted, where the funded rates, how much money they have versus how much they owe in California, went to like 80%. I think right now it's in the 70 percentile. But they didn't have enough money to pay their liabilities. And yet 40% of their money is sitting in debt in the middle of a debt crisis with yields in the neighborhood of 4-ish%. And then overall, they have to earn 7%. It's just like, it's a massive mind problem, right? And I think that problem does not go away. I don't see, I'm super bullish on Doge being able to do some inefficiencies, but I'm actually more bullish on that unleashing, like removing some of the bureaucracy that holds back productivity, than I am on it actually solving the debt crisis in and of itself. So I think it's a great project, but I don't see any nation in this world adequately addressing the debt crisis that we have, and I don't think that that's really an electable thing. So if it's not, the debt crisis continues. In a debt crisis continuing, it's not the best idea in the world to be the person that's lending the money. And so I don't think that makes sense for 40% of people's portfolios. I think that this part of this, and we were talking about this before the pod, is that there's an educational component to this, that people that aren't educated in Bitcoin, they're not going to be able to save in Bitcoin. But for a crypto native audience that has deep conviction, I have deep conviction. I actually feel when I've had less Bitcoin for whatever trading or whatever, I feel uncomfortable. I actually don't sleep well when I don't have Bitcoin. When I have Bitcoin and it's crashing, I sleep good. I sleep like a baby. And this kind of gets into like, everyone's mind's different, but if I'm in dollars, I'm not sleeping. I'm like, oh my gosh, like why, like I hope Bitcoin doesn't just rip while I'm sleeping, or if for me, if I'm out the risk spectrum and in an NFT or meme coin or something like that, like I also don't sleep as well. When I'm in Bitcoin, I sleep great. And to me, that kind of gets to my conviction of Bitcoin being a true savings asset. When it comes to equities, this is where AI really plays in, is that there's going to be a massive, massive disruption. And we're sitting here and say, okay, put 60% of your portfolio in S&P 500 fund, where a lot of these companies are going to be disrupted to such a large degree. I don't even know what they're going to be worth. And they might be worth a fraction of the value that they're currently worth. And maybe that plays out in dollars, maybe it doesn't, because obviously we have a debt crisis and there's a fiat printing. And so, but in real terms, like what could you buy for one share of whatever, S&P 500? I think that's going to go down actually in real terms. But Bitcoin, I think, goes up. And it goes up because it's the only clear alternative to the global fiat debt crisis. It's the only thing that I think that AI will clearly use. I think AI will clearly use crypto, and it's not going to be. I mean, I'm pretty bullish on stablecoins, but with the fiat debt crisis, it's not like that you want to hold stablecoins, just park it there, right? You're still owning a dollar that's being debased at a very rapid rate. And then further out the risk spectrum, I think those are more trades. And I think that they're obviously risky trades. If you're really into the system, I think you could potentially make more than you can in Bitcoin. I think most people that invest in those tend to lose money. And the top, think about like a poker game, that if it's a poker game that maybe 10%, 5% of people are going to be the winners in that casino. And there are winners. I have friends that have made a ton of money trading, but I think that you have to make sure that you're not the dumb money at the table, but actually the smart money, and challenge yourself to say, okay, what's my advantage versus the other people? And there's a lot of reasons to have an advantage. And I think one of the great things about crypto and Bitcoin is that the individual tends to have an advantage over the institution. And that's a very reversed thing than standard markets. But ultimately, to me, the one thing that all this points out to is the larger allocation you can have to Bitcoin, the more likely you are to be a long run winner.
Mm-hmm. The one question that I know uh, everybody would say to that is, okay, but what if let's say all my savings are in Bitcoin and Bitcoin drops 50% and I have an emergency and I need cash. Okay, now I have to pull out at a bad time. How do you not think Bitcoin has a big drop again at some point in the future? Is that why you're confident in this thesis? Or maybe explain to us like how that scenario would work.
I think the chances of Bitcoin dropping and sustaining below 65 to 70K are almost zero. So that's a thesis that I have. Now, obviously, there's always the probability of some liquidation event that can send prices for a day or a week, who knows how low. But as far as like a month plus basis, I just don't foresee it actually trading back below 65 to 70K. And so to me, you always have to look at your short-term needs. And I would say if you have needs in the next 6 to 12 months, that's not a savings account, that's a checking account. And so I'm not telling people to put their checking account into Bitcoin, right? You need to be able to cover your liabilities. And I think that liability even includes, whatever, some sort of a crisis that may not be very probable, but is possible. Like, let's say you have a deductible on your medical insurance that's whatever, 10, 15K for the year. Okay, like that, maybe that goes in a checking account. But beyond that, saving for the long run in Bitcoin, and being able to feel comfortable that yes, it's volatile, but that volatility is actually a blessing. Like when that volatility goes away, that's when the opportunity to really increase your net worth in these assets are going to go down.
Okay, let's talk about what happens when the rest of the world catches up to this. And what I mean when I say that is, uh, there's still a lot of people who either, as you said, aren't educated about Bitcoin and crypto yet, or are skeptical, or because of regulation, if you're talking about corporations or institutions, aren't able to access it very easily. So there's a lot of roadblocks, or a lot of reasons why people aren't in it yet. What happens when the all the rest of the world catches up to this? When do you think that happens?
Yeah, good question. yeah, crypto and Bitcoin to me are already a fairly global asset. Now there's obviously different nations and that have taken different regulatory approaches to Bitcoin, and China continually bans and unbans it, and you just never know what's going to happen out of there. But ultimately, I do think that what's happening right now is a massive deregulation of Bitcoin and crypto in the United States. And so I actually don't necessarily think that the United States has been the obvious leader in crypto to date. And you see that with all the different entrepreneurs that end up leaving the United States to launch whatever business idea that they have. And so I think there's going to start to be a pullback to the United States as deregulation happens here. But ultimately, I think it's interesting with crypto in the sense that we kind of touched on this a little bit, that the individual has beat the institution when it came to allocating to Bitcoin and crypto. I think even when you look at the United States, the states themselves are looking likely to beat the nation in actually developing a strategic Bitcoin stockpile. And on the surface, maybe that is a little bit murky as to why. But if you think about a state and a state being concerned about the nation that protects the state being irresponsible with regards to their money, then the state actually protecting itself against the irresponsible nation makes a lot of sense. And so that's what we're seeing right now. And I think there's over 10 states that currently have various places along the way of getting to owning Bitcoin directly, and they're way further along in the United States. I think that the United States is drastically short Bitcoin, and it would see. I'm personally, and I'm obviously an American. I'm an America first maxi. I'm not a dollar maxi. Like the dollar is a means to the end for American to put America first, but to put America first, you actually have to be sober about the reality that we face. And when you are sober about that reality, and you see the tailwinds behind Bitcoin, the United States would be way better off to start buying it in a drastic way now. But I think that conversation, I think, is anything but baked at this point. But I'm trying to help any way I can, educate and push us towards doing something. But if it's not us, I think other countries will. And ultimately, I think there's going to be a race to acquire Bitcoin, and it will probably really kick off when one of the top 3 to 5 countries by GDP in the world start publicly announcing that they're acquiring Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You mentioned earlier that one of your scenarios for, you think of probabilities, one of your probabilities right now is that we could see, maybe 20 to 25% chance that we go back to the 70K level in Bitcoin. And obviously you can extrapolate what that would mean for the rest of the crypto market. Everything would go down even further by a percentage basis. What are the other probabilities that you're looking at right now, either short term or for the rest of 2025?
Yeah, so with regards to Bitcoin, which you can extrapolate out to the broader crypto markets, call it, just roughly speaking, 25% of a deeper correction in here, 50% that we chop around this area, plus or minus 20%, 15, 20%.
Sort of in like the 90 to 108 range, basically.
Yeah, maybe even slightly broader, like low 80s to 120, like just kind of in that, just keeps chopping around for the next 3-4 months before, or also about a 25% that we break out to the upside in the next couple of months. As far as towards the end of the year, I would put a 80 to 90% probability that we're trading substantially higher than we are right now. So very bullish on the markets throughout the course of 2025. We talked about how for Strive, we're really only feel comfortable with allocating to Bitcoin for our clients, because we're long-term investors, right? Thinking over the course of 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. But looking at some of these Bitcoin dominance measures, stuff like that, I do think that we're getting closer to the end of the rise of Bitcoin versus other alts. My my base case would be that there's that you start to see some bigger alt rallies, but there's actually a little bit higher to go for Bitcoin dominance from here. But throughout 2025, I do think that it will move out the risk spectrum into other cryptocurrencies. But base case would be that we're not in an alt season quite yet. Maybe a local alt bottom though with volatility last night.
Yeah, I think all of our listeners will be happy to hear you say that, because everybody's been screaming when alt season for, it feels like forever, but our memories are so short. So as you look forward, the one thing that I always like to ask people like yourself who have experience in TradFi and experience in professional investing for years and decades is the impact of seasonality. And it feels like every year plays out in sort of a similar way, where everybody goes away for the summer and the markets dip or not a lot of liquidity. Do you think that same thing happens again? Because the one thing that, and I know you don't have a crystal ball, but the one thing that it always feels like when we're here and we're looking forward, it always feels like, oh, this is different. This year is different, right? And I always want to kind of try to remember, is it actually going to be different, or is it more likely just to history repeat itself? Because as you're saying, with altcoin season, if that actually does play out the way we all think it will throughout this year, then hey, history did repeat itself and it happened again. And we were all just a little bit impatient, which does tend to happen. So curious, how do you think about seasonality throughout the year?
Well, in traditional markets, there's definitely a seasonality in the summertime, and I don't think it's much more complicated than a lot of people are going on vacations in the summertime. And so in traditional markets, that's not the selling season, right? So like if you think about like a cadence for a company, you really want to be hitting sells in from now to call it into May, and then really pick up again going into September. And so I do think that you tend to have a slower market then. But I think if I was to make the argument for how could this time be different, and not a prediction, but how could it be different, it would be that AI innovation really upends kind of traditional cycles. And if we're in this cycle of a 10-year period where there's 100 years of innovation, then every month matters materially more than it would have mattered historically. So that would be an argument broadly for this time being different. And it may or not for seasonality, but broadly, I do think that does, if you have 100 years of innovation in 10 years, then this time is different in a certain sense. And then I think the Trump factor, that Trump he's always on, and him and Elon and the Viveks and the RFKs, like those guys are kind of going founder mode on the U.S. government. So there's less likely to be some sleepy period from the United States for a period of multiple months. So I do think that regardless of if the markets go up or not during summer, that it's probably not going to be a sleepy 3 month period of time.
Okay, so before we wrap here, Matt, so we've got the AI trade, which is difficult to make, as we said at the beginning, right? There is not a clear AI trade. So your belief is that Bitcoin is really the purest AI trade, because all this disruption happens to who we don't know, how it affects the markets and these businesses we don't know, but we have the conviction that Bitcoin will continue to do well. And then also in the face of all these macro stuffs, tariff, debt, all these things also just increase your conviction in Bitcoin. But at the same time, you're confident to go down the risk curve. Well, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but going down the risk curve and entering maybe an altcoin season you see as a likelihood. Am I summarizing that well? Any final thoughts to share?
Yeah, I think the question for people to ask themselves is, what type of investor are you? What's your time horizon, right? Is your time horizon measured in months, or is it measured in years or decades? And to the extent that it's measured in years and decades, then I think it's just Bitcoin, and maybe going out the risk spectrum, thinking about Bitcoin as an asset class and maybe more levered forms of Bitcoin. I think if you're a trader, and you're in the crypto markets and trading, I do think that you're likely to have some success going out the risk spectrum. But obviously, as we know, it's in traditional markets, there's this concept of allocation versus selection. And so, are you in Bitcoin? Are you in altcoins? The selection criteria, I think, is going to be even more important than it has been in past cycles of what, if you're not in Bitcoin, what are you in? And making sure that you're in something that actually has some tailwinds and a narrative behind it, at least for kind of a shorter term trade.
Fantastic. Matt, thanks so much for joining us today and breaking this all down. Everybody listening in, let us know. Are you holding Bitcoin? I know you guys are, but just, throw a Bitcoin in the comments. Let us know, and let us know how you feel about AI and tariffs. And if you want us to dive more into these topics, as always, the show is for you guys. We appreciate your time. Have a wicked awesome day. We'll see you guys again tomorrow. Thanks, Matt.
Yeah. Thank you.
As always, if you liked today's episode, please hit subscribe and make sure you follow us so you don't miss out on the next one. There's also a link in the description to our free 5-minute daily newsletter where we simplify crypto for you while making you laugh. And if you're willing to step up your crypto investing game, we're going to also leave a link for Milk Road Pro. You get access to our portfolio where you can see exactly what we are buying. This is your #1 resource to help you invest successfully in crypto. One final note, this show is for educational purposes only, and nothing we say is financial advice. Investing in crypto or any asset is risky, and you should never invest more than you can afford to lose. Thanks so much for listening in, my friends. Have a wicked awesome day.